Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, the reality is, boys and girls, that relationships are hard. And you can never, ever judge a book by its cover because you just don't know. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you're in the seats with, once more, as always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and in a conversational fashion. And if you like how we do things around here, I'm going to assume that you do because, well, you're listening to the podcast. So you can subscribe to it. You can find us over at Amazon, Spotify, Apple, Google, basically wherever you get your podcasts. And plus, we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, I'd really appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, and we are on the Instagram, or the IG as the kids call it, either at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I say this a lot, but it's the most important, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, where it all began, intheseats.ca, for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, streaming, festivals, on demand. You name it, we got it. If it's the moving image, we're usually watching it and writing it and talking about it, and we'll love it when you come by and read about it and listen about it. So please pay us a visit and stop on by. On this episode, we got a real interesting one. We got it's hitting VOD platforms, and I believe some select theaters in the States tomorrow. And it is called Them, They, Us. And it's the story of Charlie and Lisa, who are two divorced parents in their 40s, who find themselves at that midlife crossroads. And they're single parents, but they have four very complicated teenagers. And, actually, correction, it's theaters this Friday, I believe, and, VOD on the 1st of February, so it's one of those. But we had these, it's a funny movie, but it's real, it's humanistic, there's some drama in it, it's a movie about life, which kind of just throws all the emotions up into one and lets you sort of dissect it as you need to. It's got some great performances in it. From the likes of Joey Slotnick and Amy Hargraves, but we had the distinct pleasure of sitting down with director Jon Sherman, and who also co-wrote the film with Melissa Vogley Woods, and we talk about sort of the origins of the story and how it all got started, and just how they wanted the tone of it all to pull from real life and not feel like an affectation or feel like it was leaning into a trope or anything like that, to make a very sort of honest but also funny movie at the same time that just shows the reality of the human existence. I mean, sometimes there's some bent in it, sometimes there's some heartbreak, and sometimes there's some hilarity. And I think this film shows that exceptionally well. But I hope you enjoy the film when you check it out, either in theaters or on VOD platforms next week. But enjoy our talk with Jon and Melissa, because I certainly know that I did.
It straddles that line between heartfelt and pretty goofy all at the same time. It manages to go back and forth pretty seamlessly. Walk me through sort of the origin of the story.
Well, yeah. So I'm an independent filmmaker who's made a lot of romantic comedies, and I wanted to do something that, well, I've been a film teacher for the last 10 years, and I wanted to make a film that is about people who are getting sort of a second chance in life. And it's loosely autobiographical, let's say, inspired by true events, although what's actually in the movie, a few things happened, a few things didn't. So we really wanted to make a movie that had the tone of what it's like to be a parent, because there's really a fine line between tragedy and comedy when you're a parent to four teenagers. And I think tonally the movie tries to achieve that. It's also inspired by some of my favorite filmmakers like Preston Sturges and Billy Wilder, who were able to change tone in their movies as well. So I kind of look to those classic romantic comedies as a template for doing something contemporary. So that's kind of the influence of the film teacher in me as well. Melissa, do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. Along the lines of what John said about dealing with contemporary issues and being over 40 parents with 4 teenagers. And we also really wanted to bring in the complexity of dealing with sexuality in that age, and some sense of play in sexuality, and like being open to having conversations over that in relationships. And that was another thing that we wanted to weave into the narrative.
It felt so important that this not be, because I mean we've seen similar iterations of this story, but it's ended up with sort of that Hollywood ending with everyone around the breakfast table and everyone smiling and that kind of thing. How important was it for you guys, like you say, to sort of show that fine line between the tragedy and the comedy? Because I mean, especially, I think that comes through really well in Joey's performance, because I mean, obviously he is somebody who can play it for laughs, but you can see the world weariness on him at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's with a comedy like this, it's really important to ground the performances in reality, because it could have gone so broad, very easily. And the way you avoid that is with the casting. Like Joey and Amy are so real in everything they do. Like they just couldn't play something if it didn't feel real to them. So grounding it in reality is just really an essential aspect of it. And then once you do that, I feel like you owe it to your audience to give them something that is not going to be too sweet or too fairy tale like. It's got to reflect the reality of the situation that you set up at the beginning of the film. Happy endings, I mean, you could say that this is a bittersweet happy ending without giving anything away, but it has to be grounded in the real and within the circumstances that we establish at the beginning. But I would say that a second chance in life is almost more of a happy ending than a first chance at romance.
For sure.
Yeah, and it was really important, that ending, to not end on a marriage or something like that, that it became like it was just a segment of a continuation in a way, so that there wasn't a finality, because things are always happening and always developing, and you always have this counterpoint to happiness and tragedy in life. And we wanted it to keep it in the real with like that. And that's why the ending was the way it was.
Can you talk to me about finding the kids? Because I mean, they're all so fantastic, and they're all really sort of running the gamut of sort of the wide spectrum of emotions that you go through when you're that age.
Yeah, thank you. That's really nice of you to say. We had 2 different casting directors. So we had a casting director in New York who did the main 2 parts, and then found Lexi Bean in New York, who plays Maddie, the eldest of the kids. And it was essential to find a non-binary actor as well to play that part. So Lexi did that and more, and brought so much, like grounded reality to the role. I think you could say that like that character is definitely going through some kind of a depression too. And it's really important to find that balance in a comedy where it's like, it's sad, whatever they are going through is sad, but it's very real and grounded. So it's a balancing act, I think, with the tone, so that it feels like something real that a teenager is going through, but without tipping the balance of the movie. And then the other casting director was Lynn Myers in Cincinnati, who helped us find all the actors in the Midwest. So kind of a hub for production, because Todd Haynes has filmed a bunch of movies there. So Lynn has deep connections in not just Ohio, but also throughout the Midwest. And those kids we found, Jack Steiner, who played Danny, had just graduated from the University of Cincinnati and was recommended through a colleague. And Shanna was in Cleveland, and Sarah was in Louisville. So we really wanted to find actors from the Midwest. And we feel like this really very much is a Columbus, Ohio story. And we wanted to find actors not just from the coast to play these kids. And then they had to look like a family too. Right. So that was also kind of essential.
And I mean, I also love sort of the idea of exploring the world of kink a little bit, because as a totem for these 2, people in their 40s getting together, it seems like one of those things that feels believable and exploring. Like, when you were writing the scripts and developing everything, how important was it to sort of, I mean, I guess have something with a little bit of a bent to it, because I mean, I think of this as a totem, and I mean, it could have been a variety of different things, but making it kink almost makes it that much more disarming.
Yeah, well, when I first moved to Columbus 10 years ago, I remember a real estate agent showing me around and saying, this is a white bread town. You're not going to find anything too edgy here. And I was like, I don't think that's really true. So I think that once you explore beneath the surface of a place, you think of like, yeah, Columbus has that sort of Midwestern nice too, but there's so many different kinds of people here. And then it was really important to actively seek out members of the community here, which there is one, and do our real due diligence in terms of research. So Trina and Drew, who own the space that we actually filmed in, and then Trina plays Lauren, the character in the film too. So we had to sort of train her to be an actress, and I think she did a great job because she's just really good at that. So we spent a long time doing research, going to events and seeing like how this community functions. And it was really fun. Like there's so much joy that in that world that you don't see in movies. Either it's really serious, like 50 Shades of Grey, or it's super broad, like, you know, The Businessman with the Dominatrix.
Right.
And we really want to show these people who like, you know, just kind of love their bodies for what they are, and, you know, exploring the fun side of sexuality. I mean, it could be anything, you know, it's just it's about people who, you know, don't want to get stuck in their 40s and say like, I'm going to try new things and see where it takes me, you know.
We were really intrigued by that community as well, because they have a lot of practices around consent and discussing what you want and talking about like your fantasies and how to fulfill them. And there's a lot of dialogue, and we were really interested in like showing that end of the kink world as well.
Yeah,
well, it definitely works.
The consent thing is really interesting too, because, you know, now you have all these intimacy coordinators on set,
right,
to help with sex scenes, and that the language they use is completely taken from the world of kink, where you have to say like, is it okay if I do this now? How about this? And you sort of map out what, you know, what the play is going to be. So it felt right with the story. And then also like, you know, just the non-gender binary character just feels like these are characters that are outside the norm a little bit, but recognizable people too. Like we really set out to do a family comedy. Like, you know, I think this is the same, like, just because it's a contemporary family comedy, like it feels to me like a family movie. I mean, I'm not going to say like you should watch it with like, you know, under 16-year-olds, but it has the tone of a family comedy. You know, it's just updated for the moment that we find ourselves in right now, I think.
I think you're absolutely right. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. There are just so many families like this, these blended families that, I mean, we've just come in contact with so many people that have watched the film and recognized themselves in it, you know, and we've had story, you know, that you have like, you know, Yours, Mine, and Ours, but it's done really broadly and saccharine and syrupy, and we didn't want it to be that at all.
Well, I mean, the reality of stories like this is that they're messy, and I mean, life is messy, and I mean, I think you guys put that on screen in a beautifully effective way. And I mean, was there? I mean, I'm looking for the right way to phrase this, but like, how did you draw the line between wanting to play into jokes and sort of having a laugh versus the messy realities? Where did you find sort of the middle ground ultimately?
Sure, that it's not too broad. I mean, it's like I really wanted to make people laugh throughout, even in the scenes that are a little bit more sadder or more dramatic. We tried to find something funny in those as well, just to sort of reflect that fine line of that messiness of life. Because like, you know, you could be like in the middle of the hardest conversation with your teenagers, and then they'll say something that'll make you laugh, and you'll both be cracking up a second later. So, and then there'll be tears, you know, another 30 seconds after that too. So I think, you know, when you're raising teenagers on your own and then also blending a family, it just couldn't help be anything but that, really.
Yeah.
Also, the pacing, I think, was really rooted in reality, how quickly things can go from dramatic to hilarious just in life, how
Right.
you rest, then something happens. And I feel like the film's pacing kind of speaks to that as well, that it's just sort of one thing after the other in a way.
No, I agree.
The pacing really was meant to be an update of a screwball comedy. You know, like that sense of like a character who's running around like a chicken without a head, trying to do 50 things at once, which is what it feels like when you're a parent of teenagers. So he's just constantly like the whole first act, he's just like running from one thing to the next, you know, which I think a lot of parents will identify with.
Well, and the Preston Sturges influence is there as well. It works for the material. And I mean, just as a side note, I've got to ask: is An Idiot's Guide to the New Testament really a book? Is it a real book, or did you make that up?
We had to make that one up because we couldn't get the rights to the cover otherwise. So like the production designer and the prop people had a lot of fun with that. So yeah, it's what is it? I think it's like the Total Morons Guide to the New Testament,
right.
because we weren't allowed to say the Idiot's Guide. You know, you have to clear every piece of artwork. Like when you actually go to make an independent film like this, you know, when you can't throw money at a problem, like having Melissa's art in the film helps a lot because she could clear it, you know, but then we have other artists whose work is shown and we have to clear that too. So every book, every poster, you have to clear all the art. So you're constantly having to just invent new things that are similar to, you know, what people recognize, but not quite that.
No, I mean, this is a silly question and you've kind of already answered it, but it's one I always like to ask. I always like to talk to people about sort of that movie moment or that movie when they were a young person that they saw that sort of flipped the switch and made them want to get into this business.
That's your question because I'm an artist.
Yeah. I mean, the movie I come back to over and over again is The Apartment, the Billy Wilder movie. And that's, you know, that kind of expertise in that level. Like there's the scene where, you know, he brings the jockey's wife up to his house on Christmas Eve.
Right.
And in the foreground, there's a farce happening. And in the bedroom behind the door, Shirley MacLaine has taken an overdose of sleeping pills. So there's a tragedy happening in the background and a farce happening in the foreground. And literally the director he's creating, you know, two different tones within the same shot. I mean, it's remarkable, you know, like that's always the touch point for me, like of how do you manage that? How do you juggle those different tones that it feels like real life? And, you know, that it's changing tones is one of the hardest things I think to do as a filmmaker. And, you know, a movie like Sullivan's Travels does it throughout, like over the course of a film. But The Apartment, I mean, there's tragedy and comedy in every scene of that movie. And I just always come back to it, you know, as a touchstone.
Well, I mean, I think you guys have captured a lot of that in this film. And I mean, I think that's what makes it such an exciting piece of cinema because it's life. We can see ourselves in it, in the messy and in the funny, which is why we all get up in the morning and keep putting one foot in front of the other. And that's just part of the human experience. And thanks for sharing this story with us. And thanks for the time today.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.